First man to win back-to-back Formula One World Championships was Alberto Ascari of Italy, who drove to the title in 1952 and 53 in a new car called a Ferrari. The next to achieve the feat was Juan Manuel Fangio of Argentina, who won the title from 54 to 57, 4 in a row in 4 different types of car. Jack Brabham of Australia opened the era of rear-engine cars by wheeling his 4-cylinder Cooper Climax to successive titles in 1959 and 60. 2.5 decades passed before the next back-to-back champion, Alain Prost of France, who triumphed in 1985 and 86 for McLaren Porsche. That same car with a Honda engine carried perhaps the purest racing driver of all, Ayrton Senna of Brazil, to the World Driving Championship in 1990 and 91. Now another driver stands poised to join that illustrious group of 5, Michael Schumacher of Germany. In a Grand Prix career that spans just 4 seasons, Schumacher has alternately finessed and barged his way to the pinnacle of world motorsport. Today, he hopes to join the list of back-to-back Formula One World Driving Champions. ESPN Speed World welcomes you to what stacks up to be the clinching round of the 1995 Formula One World Championship, the Grand Prix of the Pacific. Hello again, everyone. I'm Bob Varsha. For the final 3 races of the year, the Formula One circus moves to the Pacific Rim. 2 races in Japan and 1 in Australia. Today's Grand Prix of the Pacific takes place in perhaps the remotest racetrack in the world, the TI circuit in Aida, Japan, nestled in the mountains of the southern Japanese mainland. Here's the situation. Coming off a brilliant performance in our most recent race at the Nürburgring, Michael Schumacher leads the World Driving Championship by 27 points. He needs just 3 points in today's race, 4th place or better, and he will have his back-to-back World Championships. In the Constructors' battle, Benetton Renault leads by 20 points, and that battle is likely to go down to the final race of the year on the streets of Adelaide, Australia. Derek Daly is with me as always. Let's get right to the Daily News.
First headline is that Damon Hill did in fact suffer a hairline fracture during his crash at the Nürburgring, but he was still able to go testing recently at Imola. Mika Häkkinen is out of the Pacific Grand Prix, having had his appendix removed last Saturday. Danish sensation Jan Magnussen will fill in. Ferrari's new V10 engine design has been running at Fiorano recently, and it was immediately on the pace with the V12. The 96 schedule is now official, with 17 race dates blocked, but only 14 races confirmed. Now there will be no more than 16 races total, and the season will now end in mid-October instead of mid-November. The much-rumored change of qualifying procedure for next season has now been confirmed also. There will be only one official qualifying session on Saturday, which we knew about. It will be 12 laps long, and you can use the spare car in qualifying, but not in practice. Nigel Mansell is back in the news. In his recently launched autobiography, he slammed the management of McLaren, saying that they simply do not understand the problems and are not capable of solving them.
Available in bookstores near you. Now let's take a look at the starting lineup for today's race. There's a look at the track with the different timing intermediates. Pictures coming to us from Japanese television as well as the sounds. About a 100-foot elevation change on this racetrack. Now as the cars warm up engines and tires, let's take a look at our Prestone starting grid. On the pole for the 4th straight race, David Coulthard, a track he had never seen before. He's on pole with a lap at better than 111 miles an hour. Damon Hill will be alongside on the dirty part of the racetrack for the start. Row 2 will be last year's winner, Michael Schumacher, in the Benetton alongside Jean Alesi of France, who came here with a touch of the flu, but is ready for his 100th Grand Prix start. Row 3 will be last year's runner-up, Gerhard Berger, a new father after the birth of a daughter last week, and Eddie Irvine of Northern Ireland in the Jordan Peugeot. Row 4 will be Johnny Herbert in the 2nd Benetton and Heinz-Harald Frentzen in the Sauber Ford. On Row 5, Olivier Panis of France in the Ligier, next to the McLaren of Mark Blundell of Great Britain. On Row 6, Rubens Barrichello of Brazil in the Jordan. He climbed his first Grand Prix podium in 3rd place last year. Alongside will be Jan Magnussen filling in for the absent Mika Häkkinen. Magnussen's welcome to Formula One. He's already been fined for speeding in the pit lane. On Row 7, Aguri Suzuki back in the Ligier for the first time since the German Grand Prix, next to Pedro Lamy of Portugal in the Minardi. Row 8 will be Jules Bouillon of France in the Sauber Ford, next to the Minardi of Luca Badoer of Italy. And then the teammates side by side. First the Tyrrells, Abukio Katayama back after his big crash in Portugal, and Mika Salo of Finland. Then the footworks, Gianni Morbidelli back for the first time since the French Grand Prix alongside Taki Inoue. Row 11, Pedro Diniz of Brazil and his 44 teammate Roberto Moreno. And on the final row, Andrea Montermini of Italy and Bertrand Gachot of France in the Pacifics. Let's talk quickly about the racetrack, Derek.
Here's a more detailed look at this circuit that's carved into the mountains. Features many low and medium speed corners. It is a very low grip surface. Since last year, there's been extensive gravel bed modifications, and that Moss S-bend you see there is much wider and faster. Key to success, management of your tires between these pit stops.
Field coming to its position on the grid. As you can see, everybody trying to stay over on the driver's left before moving onto the dirty line to the right. There is Michael Schumacher looking down into his cockpit. There you see the conditions, 67 degrees. We were told there was a good chance of rain, but skies are sunny at the moment. Now we have a new rule in place. Effective immediately, the green light can come on anytime after the red light. There was a 47-second delay, that is 4 to 7 seconds delay in the past, but the green could come on anytime after the red light flashes. The field is now set. There's the green light. Here we go. And a quick green it is. Lots of tire smoke from one of the Ferraris on row 3. David Coulthard will lead. Schumacher will challenge Hill around the outside in turn 1.
And Damon Hill was so worried about the dirty line trying to get off the start line, but he made a blinder of a start. But then he got into a fight with Schumacher. They almost touched in that long right-hander.
Schumacher driven to the edge of the racetrack. One of the Ferraris slipped by ahead of Hill to the highest point on the circuit now. Alesi runs second, then Hill, then Berger, and then Michael Schumacher.
This is down to the hairpin. It is a banked corner. Down to Revolver. All these corners have names, not numbers. Here's that infield section behind the pit lane. Look at David Coulthard pulls away.
There is Schumacher. He'll be getting a lot of attention. Fourth place or better will net him the world championship. But if he doesn't get it here, he has 2 more races in which to get it. And no matter what Damon Hill or anyone else might do for that matter, 3 points is all Michael Schumacher needs. Look at the gap already opened up by David Coulthard, who has been absolutely scintillating this weekend. In fact, his Friday time would have qualified him for pole, but he improved it on Saturday. No one has been able to touch him this weekend.
2 McLaren boys run together there. Jan Magnussen, very unruffled in his Grand Prix debut. Here you see Schumacher back with Johnny Herbert. Incredibly, David Coulthard was 0.7 of a second faster than the whole field in the morning warm-up. And his only comment after his pole was he sincerely hoped he could race his race car, not do something stupid and have to go to his T-car. Look at Damon Hill has a little poke down the inside.
Jean Alesi having none of it. David Coulthard 0.7 quicker than the next man in the warm-up. That next man was a shocker. It was Jules Bouillon, the number 2 man in the Sauber Ford. Another look at the start.
Now watch what Schumacher does here as he goes to the first corner. Side by side with Damon Hill, and Damon Hill begins to squeeze him, and Schumacher backs off, and Alesi goes down the inside.
That was the infamous first corner where Ayrton Senna was knocked off by Mika Hakkinen last year and speared by the Ferrari of Nicola Larini. Virtually half this field, 12 drivers, have not raced here at AIDA before. Of course, that was only the one race held here last year. 12 new faces in the field, including Bertrand Gachot at the back, who was here last year but did not qualify for the race.
4.2 seconds clear of the whole field after just 2 laps. David Coulthard averaging better than 2 seconds a lap over the rest of the field, but Damon Hill certainly looks faster than Jean Alesi, but this is very difficult to make a move here. Look at the gap. Stretches out, and David Coulthard emphasizes his superiority with the fastest lap at 17.1, which is a full 10 seconds slower than Ayrton Senna's qualifying time of last season.
This racetrack itself is a bit of a fascinating story. It was built by a Japanese millionaire golf course developer named Hajime Tanaka. It is named for him, Tanaka International Circuit. It is basically a country club where you can buy a membership for about $150,000. park your car here, come out, rent the racetrack, drive it when you please, or you can rent one of Mr. Tanaka's 3 personally owned Tyrrell Formula One cars and drive those.
Correct myself. He is 7 seconds off the pole position time set by Ayrton Senna last year. Gasho is out. 7 seconds. That pole time was in the 10s last year, 14s this year. So that's how much slower these cars are because of the modifications brought about largely because of Senna's terrible crash.
Bertrand Gachot, who did not know he would be driving for this team until Thursday before Friday practice. They had hoped to bring in a paying driver, a Japanese driver, but that driver could not land a Formula One super license, so Bertrand Gachot, who owns a part of the Pacific team, had to hop into the car and race it this weekend. If not, the team would have come under a $250,000 penalty payable to the promoter of the race for failing to show with both of its race cars.
Damon Hill still tries to find a way past the Ferrari. Ferrari came here this weekend with a new design of front wing, trying to make that car more effective. It's certainly effective enough right now, able to hold off Damon Hill. And you see the trouble here with this racetrack. Look at these constant radius right and left medium speed corners. The braking zones are not very long, so no matter how much faster Damon Hill seems to be exiting corners, the braking zones are simply too short and fast to make a lunge down the inside. Schumacher follows Berger.
The audio tells you everything. It is basically get on the throttle, then quickly get on the brakes. No very long straightaways except one on the backside that provides virtually the only passing point, say the drivers, braking for the hairpin on the infield section.
Which is the corner they approach now. This is the fastest portion of the racetrack also. 180 miles an hour. Here's the braking zone. That's Schumacher, I believe, going down the inside of the Ferrari.
And that will move Schumacher up into 4th place behind Coulthard, Alesi, and Hill.
He made a strange comment this weekend. Strange certainly for Michael Schumacher. He said, "I would prefer to be world champion than to take a risk and possibly go off the racetrack," suggesting a possibly conservative run for Michael Schumacher. And certainly he looks conservative at the moment compared to what we have seen. But look at David Coulthard. What a statement he has made ever since Frank Williams announced that he would no longer have him in his team. Being replaced by Jacques Villeneuve, who is currently running all over the world testing the Williams.
And there is a good reason for that. We'll talk about the new qualifying rules that will be in place next year as you take another look at Schumacher at the back of your screen going down the inside of Berger and getting into the 4th place, which is all he needs to clinch the 1995 World Driving Championship here today. The Schumacher era is in full flower here in Japan, and we'll be back with more of the Grand Prix of the Pacific in a moment. This ESPN Speed World presentation, the Formula One Grand Prix of the Pacific, is brought to you by Texaco Haviland Formula 3 Motor Oil. Add more life to your car. Take it to the star. By Firestone, America's tire since 1900. And by Toyota Motorsports. Our minds are always racing. Welcome back to the Grand Prix of the Pacific. Looks like Jules Bouillon race is finished for the Sauber Ford team. And he had such a promising day that dawned with 2nd quickest time in the morning warm-up behind only David Coulthard, who at this point is running away with this Grand Prix. There you see Michael Schumacher needing only 3 points from this race to clinch the World Championship, or less if something should happen to the man directly in front of him right now, Damon Hill. That is Jean Alesi in the red Ferrari, then Hill, and then Michael Schumacher. Meanwhile, up front, you see on the left, David Coulthard going very quickly and continuing to draw away. Derek Daly with me as always. Derek? It's been since Frank Williams told David Coulthard that he would not be with the team next year that Coulthard has basically come alive, but he credits a lot of it to a talking to given to him by his mentor, Jackie Stewart. What could Stewart have possibly told David Coulthard that has made such a change in his driving?
Indeed, and David is happy to discuss that little pep talk with Jackie Stewart. Jackie, of course, the mentor for many young drivers in America. Gilles de Ferran was a benefactor of a lot of Jackie's guidance, and he has gone on to greatness in IndyCar racing and will continue to be successful. But David Coulthard's case was very interesting because he clearly said that Stewart thought that he braked too late, got to the corner in too much of a hustle and bustle situation, had to lose the momentum of the car that he carried to the apex and simply had to accelerate again. And he said all that work literally slowed down the corner speeds. He suggested he brake earlier, arrive in control, maintain his momentum through the apex. And although David can't actually feel a huge difference to his driving style, he is aware of it. And suddenly he has gone lightning fast in the Williams, which of course prompted Frank Williams to say, as we know, that he might have made one of his biggest mistakes in letting David Coulthard slip through his fingers.
You got to look there at the gap from Coulthard back to this battle for second place, Alesi, Hill, and Schumacher.
And one of the biggest problems here has been this low grip racetrack. And on the previous lap, we got a good look at Damon Hill get the Williams sideways on the way up the hill, and we saw black streaks being left from those rear tires. So even at this early stage, with just 10 laps completed, these cars are beginning to fight for traction. Believe it or not, even though there's no competition between the tire companies here, the tires are still only good for one fast lap during qualifying, which is almost like a specific qualifying tire.
The teams have been hoarding their fresh sets of Goodyear C compound rubber, one of the softer Goodyear compounds. The drivers complain there is little or no traction on the racetrack at all. It is not used much. Damon Hill now blocking Schumacher.
Oh, he is blocking him. That is not the normal line. Well, that made it look easy.
Oh, it's not over yet. Schumacher has to get on the binders. Hill slips back in front. Now, this is not a fight that Schumacher needs to be involved in.
No, that is the only banked corner on the racetrack. The braking zone gives you an opportunity, and the banking potentially gives you an outside line. But we saw Schumacher lock up his brakes. Damon Hill has no option. He has to finish ahead of Schumacher, and he has to win the race.
Here's another look coming down to that corner. Schumacher on the right.
And it's not blocking. Damon Hill never changed his line, and Schumacher locks up the lightly loaded inside right front, simply lets the apex go to Damon Hill, and he's safely on his way.
Frank Williams watching like a hawk as always.
We mentioned very quickly tire saving this weekend. Lots of the teams only ran half the number of qualifying laps. David Coulthard this morning in the warm-up started his session on wet weather tires. Oh, the second of the Ligier Suzuki is off the racetrack.
Aguri Suzuki returning to the team. For a while, it appeared as though he was going to replace Martin Brundle. Then there were rumors that Brundle would be driving for the team because Tom Walkinshaw, who directs its engineering efforts, is not pleased with the way Olivier Panis has been driving. But Panis is French, and with all the heavy French sponsorship of the Ligier team, it was decided that Panis would drive, and Martin Brundle can prepare himself for his ride next year with the Jordan team.
The reason Coulthard, I'll finish that story, started on the wet weather tires this morning, simply the 3 laps it took him to bed in a new gearbox was too much running on a new set of slick tires. So he chose the wet weather. He can use as many of those as he likes as they still try and grab Suzuki out of the gravel trap.
So the first of our 3 Japanese drivers in the field has now disappointed his fans and will head for the garage. We'll be back for more in just a moment. Back at the Grand Prix of the Pacific, lapping of slower traffic going on. We want to remind you, coming up tonight on ESPN2, RPM tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Kenny Mayne will be standing by in the studio with highlights of the Winston Cup and Busch Grand National events at Rockingham. IndyCar President Andrew Craig will talk about the Indy 500 and the IRL, and we'll have footage of the first IndyCar test at the new Homestead Motorsports Complex. Maurizio Gugelmin, former Formula One driver, will be on the oval at Homestead. All that and a lot more tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern, RPM tonight on The Deuce. Bob Varsha and Derek Daly with you. You're watching the battle for second place as it continues. Jean Alesi in the Ferrari, Damon Hill in the Williams, and Michael Schumacher in the Benetton. Meanwhile, David Coulthard continues to draw away at almost a second a lap.
To everybody's surprise, David Coulthard, I said it while we were in commercial there, he looks like Ayrton Senna right now. With such ease, he's able to run away from these other chasing cars in the last four races. I mean, he looks so totally in control. And these boys here are fighting among themselves, and he just runs away.
Let's total it up. Jean Alesi making $5 or $6 million with Ferrari. Damon Hill making $3 or $4 million with Williams this year. Michael Schumacher making $20 million with Benetton, it is rumored. That's a lot of dollars being left in the dust by David Coulthard, who came pretty cheaply to Frank Williams this year.
About to lap Roberto Moreno, whose teammate Pedro Diniz is being courted by Ligier, we believe, and also being requested to bring some of as many millions as Magnussen gets into a fight with one of the Jordan cars. Tit for tat here. Jordan makes the move and Magnussen pulls it back.
Rubens Barrichello, Magnussen, like Coulthard, looking very strong on his first visit to this racetrack. As mentioned, 12 drivers visiting this track for the first time, not including Tyrrell driver Mika Salo, who drove here in Japanese Formula 3000. There's a look at the list. Mika Salo making his first visit in a Formula One car, but he does know a little about the racetrack. 3 of these drivers already out of the running: Suzuki, Bouillon, and Gasho. Make that 2 of them are now out of the running. There's the gap.
Close look at that Jordan. We'll get another look at that. Shows that he does not have the center-mounted rear wing that Eddie Irvine has elected to run.
See some sparse grandstands in the background. The remoteness of this racetrack makes it difficult for fans to get here. As a result, even though the place was built to house about 100,000 fans, there are about 1/4 of that actually in the grandstands this weekend. And we are told that there are still tickets advertised as being on sale for next week's Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka, which is traditionally a very tough ticket. In fact, in past years, they've gone to a lottery system to answer some of the millions of requests for the 120,000 seats available for that race. Here's a look at the top 6 in points and where they are presently running. Michael Schumacher in 4th. That's all he needs. Damon Hill in 3rd. And David Coulthard out front. Coulthard has a shot at his teammate for 2nd in the World Championship. And Damon Hill will need to be mindful of that as these last 3 races unfold.
Taki Inoue is the next man to be lapped by these leading cars. David Coulthard already whizzed by him. You can see that the lead gap is now beginning to settle down as we are on lap 16. Last lap 12.6, this lap 12.7 is Coulthard's lead over Jean Alesi. The time in brackets is always the time of the last lap. And already we have the Williams team getting ready for Damon Hill or David Coulthard. We expect 2, a minimum of 2, and maybe as many as 3 different pit stops because this surface is so hard on tires. Now Taki Inoue needs to move over and let this trio of leading cars, led by Alesi, get through, and he hasn't done it yet.
I would imagine that means Damon Hill.
Damon Hill left. Damon Hill left front. Look at this here. Remember the Germany? That's how Damon Hill lost his wing, trying to get down the inside of Jean Alesi at the apex of one of those corners, and it cost him the front wing and cost him possibly the chance of a world championship. And Schumacher quite happy to sit back and watch it.
Look at the gap continuing to open up from Coulthard to Alesi. Watching the sector times this weekend, at the beginning of our show, you saw the track broken down basically into 3 equal sections for sector times. The cars with the top speeds in each of those sectors were nowhere near having the quickest time. Case in point, in second round qualifying. Fastest top speed at the first sector, Johnny Herbert, whom you see right there in 6th spot. He was 7th in terms of qualifying position, but he had the top speed at that sector. Michael Schumacher, 3rd in qualifying, top speed in the 2nd sector. Jean Alesi, 4th in qualifying, top speed in the 3rd sector. Meanwhile, David Coulthard, nowhere near top speed, but he had the quickest time through each of those sectors. And you can see in the performance of the car today, it is time and not speed that matters in Formula One. So all 3 of our second-place battlers come into the pits together. 75-mile-an-hour speed limit in effect.
And this is not what Damon Hill wanted. He wanted to try and get one over Jean Alesi. So now it's a battle of the crews. Can they get Damon Hill ahead of Jean Alesi? I doubt it. Oh, the boys have to run. Now look at Schumacher. Yet again, the Williams team shows a lack of ability in the pit lane when it matters. And Schumacher simply comes in and goes ahead of the boys that he couldn't pass on the racetrack. And now he's second to David Coulthard.
Schumacher came in 4th and exited in 2nd. Alesi came in 2nd, exits 3rd. Damon Hill came in 3rd and exits 4th.
Well, they've dropped down a little bit, but when it all shakes out and Eddie Irvine makes his pit stop, and Johnny Herbert, of course, Gerhard Berger still out there. He hasn't made a pit stop. But bottom line is, of the 3 people that went in, Schumacher was last and he came out in 1st. That is part of how you win the World Championship. Damon Hill came in 2nd, went out 3rd, and that is part of how you lose the World Championship.
Particularly at a track like this, which eats tires, we expect basically a pit stop battle as everyone sprints from stop to stop looking for the best opportunity, the most strategic moment to go in for new rubber and fuel.
Schumacher was off the road this morning. Coming on to this front straight here, damaged the car, damaged the new design of barge boards on the side. He crashed heavily at Imola in his very last test in the Benetton because they do not want him in that car anymore because he is now moving to Ferrari.
That's Mark Blundell with the McLaren Mercedes using the MP410B chassis. Recall that they brought out a C iteration for Portugal. It was a dismal failure, so they have brought back the proven B chassis and are wrestling with it this weekend.
You say wrestling with the car, you're right. 3 different setup versions they had this morning for Mark Blundell to try in the warm-up, just trying to get a sweet spot on that car. They said they were happier with the full tank setup, but it doesn't look good at the moment because they're a long way down. In fact, Jan Magnussen is just inside the top 10, running 9th, having not made a pit stop yet. Blundell running 12th.
As you pointed out, Derek, the pit stops broke up that battle for second place. The running order right now is Coulthard, Berger, although Berger just headed for the pits. So it will be Coulthard, Herbert, Schumacher, Irvine, Frentzen, Alesi, and Hill.
See, Hill is in a traffic jam. This is the Moss S's, much faster than last year. Moreno moves over. Oh, see, Hill gets sideways on this elevation change. Long uphill run, 180 miles an hour. 6th gear for most of the cars, 7th gear for Eddie Irvine in the Jordan. There's that center wing mounted on the Jordan. All the downforce you can pile on here. Yet Barrichello preferred a lower downforce setup as Schumacher tried yesterday in the final qualifying session.
Now Johnny Herbert joined Gerhard Berger in the pits. So they will come out further back. The order now is Coulthard, Schumacher, Irvine, Alesi, Frentzen, Hill, then Berger and Herbert, then Magnussen, Rubens Barrichello, Olivier Panis, Mark Blundell, Pedro Lamy, Mika Salo, and Luca Badoer. The top 15. We'll take a quick timeout and return for more action from the 15th round of 17 in the 95 World Championship. We are back at the Grand Prix of the Pacific. Bob Varsha and Derek Daly, glad to have you with us. Now here's another look at something that happened just a moment ago. You ride with Damon Hill. Here comes Eddie Irvine across his bows, and boom!
So here it is again in replay. End of the back straight. Alesi goes inside. Now watch this. Irvine's in trouble. Hill takes a run down the inside. Boom! Collects him there with the corner of the front wing. I can presume there's damage as David Coulthard, who we believe is on a two-stop strategy, peels off into the pit lane. And where will Michael Schumacher be when David Coulthard finishes his service and whizzes out the end of the pit road?
Now let's see what the Williams team can do with this pit stop.
Plenty of fuel. Confirming the two-stop strategy, 11.3. When you stay there that long, you put a lot of fuel in. There's the story. Michael Schumacher is in second place, and David Coulthard has a heavy load of fuel now. So let's see, can Michael Schumacher run him down?
Now, in case you're wondering about suspended suspensions as a result of that bump between Damon Hill and Eddie Irvine, there are new rules coming out regarding passing, and basically they are liberalizing the whole thing, advising stewards everywhere to just simmer down and let these professionals race. If you do not overtly block or endanger another driver, you can get as close to each other as you like. A new nose awaits Damon Hill.
There was an informal dinner held in London that actually discussed that particular subject about what is right and wrong about passing, and it was requested by this man here. Damon Hill said, I need to have a clarification on these rules. And Martin Brundle was there, Gerhard Berger was there, Max Mosley, Bernie Ecclestone, Damon Hill, and basically at the bottom, the end of the day, they said, look, we have to let these boys race, so let's go back to the way it was and let them take care of themselves. The most important thing is they can race without severe blocking tactics. Now let's have a close look at Damon Hill's wing. You can see it is broken. He's broken the left front side fencing that will give the car understeer, but it is a lengthy stop if he is to have that nose replaced. We saw him do it. We saw him do it in Germany. But as long as he can maintain pace behind John Alesi, he will not want to stop.
Let's take a look at our pit stop comparisons. David Coulthard's first stop, 27.4 seconds, measured from the time he enters the pits to the time he leaves, which is really the only true measure of pit stop length. Michael Schumacher, nearly 4 seconds quicker. But as Derek mentioned, as you watch Eddie Irvine leaving the Jordan pits, David Coulthard may be on that two-stop strategy, so he'll carry a little more fuel, take a little extra time in the pits. But that will force Schumacher, who may be on that three-stop strategy, to make one extra stop. And if that's the case, Schumacher is in deep trouble right now because he cannot catch Coulthard on the racetrack.
And if you sometimes get frustrated when we cannot tell you whether they will make 2 or 3 pit stops, believe me, the teams, even during these races, will not give out any information to any of the television crews that are there, just in case somebody picks up a snippet of information that may actually cause the competition to get a leg up.
27 laps complete of 83 scheduled as you take a look down through the running order.
Here's our leader. There's Michael Schumacher. Gap remains about the same. So Coulthard, if he is on a two-stop strategy, seems to have the tire management under control here. He has so much confidence now. And when you have the amount of confidence that he has, Things just seem to get a little bit easier. He said after Estoril, it was an easier race than he imagined. And of course, the ones that you win always are. So DC, who is probably as big an IndyCar fan in Europe as there is, controls the Formula One races.
There are the points. If the race were to end now, Michael Schumacher, of course, would be the world champion. Damon Hill, however, would be coming under fire from David Coulthard, who would be just 5 points behind his teammate for second place in the World Championship. And, of course, once the championship is decided, forget talking about team orders. Damon Hill would be in the fight of his life with David Coulthard. On the front straightaway, Jean Alesi now leading Damon Hill. Jean Alesi and his Japanese girlfriend, Kumiko, have just taken on a little puppy whom they've named Tazio for Tazio Nuvolari, one of the giants of the sport of Grand Prix racing. Coulthard leads Schumacher. We'll be right back. The Grand Prix of the Pacific. Take the Chugoku Expressway out from Osaka. Turn left at the Mimisaka exit, head up into the mountains, and you are at the TI Circuit Aida. Bob Varsha, Derek Daly with you. And there you see our race leader, David Coulthard, being closed up upon by Michael Schumacher.
And on the way to the racetrack, you also cross over the Kinky Freeway.
Which appeals to you, I'm sure. Michael Schumacher has been eating David Coulthard up at nearly a second a lap.
And the strange thing is, it happened just in the last 3 laps, because he was over 3 seconds ahead of him, and suddenly the gap tumbled down. So we watched David Coulthard lock up that right front brake a couple of times, so he's obviously on his personal limit. We don't know when Schumacher will stop again. We think he has at least 2 more to 1 more of David Coulthard, and Damon Hill needs to be careful here. He's already chopped off half of that left front wing, trying to get by Jean Alesi. It is a titanic struggle here. Katayama tucks in behind in the Tyrrell. Tyrrell suffered here all weekend. This car has never been good on low grip racetracks, and the Tyrrell has suffered more than most teams here on this low grip racetrack. And of course, Mika Salo, having done 4 years of F3000, that hopes for a very good result here, as well as local hero Katayama.
50 laps remaining. 4 cars now officially out of the race. Andrea Montermini and Bertrand Gachot in the Pacifics. Now David Coulthard walked slightly by slower traffic there. Michael Schumacher right up on his gearbox. The other cars out of the race. To finish my thought, Aguri Suzuki and Jules Bouillon.
Half a second, 3.5 seconds. Suddenly in 3 laps, it's whittled down to half a second. So if Michael Schumacher can stay on this pace, he is going to be a huge challenge to David Coulthard, who now has to withstand enormous pressure. We have not seen him under enormous pressure very many times. He's either been way out in the lead, or his car has broken when he's been way in the lead. But Michael Schumacher now about to test David Coulthard in a way that he has not been tested in the past.
Across the line they come. While that battle stabilizes for a moment, we want to remind you about a couple of World Series specials coming up here on ESPN tomorrow night, Monday. The World Series 20 and 40 years ago, beginning at 9 p.m. Eastern with the 75 series between the Reds and the Red Sox, perhaps the greatest World Series ever. And then followed at 10 o'clock by the 1955 World Series special, the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Yankees. The Subway Series, in addition to game recall, will also reflect on the people and the effect on them that the World Series had. The World Series 20 and 40 years ago here on ESPN tomorrow night.
Benetton spent 2 days testing at Silverstone in England. Tried a new rear suspension, which Johnny Herbert thought made a huge difference to the car. They also came here with redesigned barge boards or side fences down the side of the car to just redirect the air under the car and around the side pods. Schumacher was not happy. He came here with massive oversteer, worked hard on the car, had understeer, has been off the road several times. But he looks strong right now, as he always seems to do. He made a comment after his qualifying when it was pointed out to him by Bob Constanduros, who does the FIA questions at the pole position press conference. He said, "You realize, Michael, you have not been on the pole since Canada?" And he reminded everybody that he's won more races than anybody else since Canada, and that is the key to his success in the World Championship. Let's go on board here with Damon Hill for a couple of minutes, or a couple of corners. Cars are softer here in the suspension to try and get some mechanical grip. Oh, see, he corrects the slide. Alesi does the same ahead of him. You see the cars move around the racetrack much more on this track than many of the tracks they go to, because the grip is so low from the surface. The suspension is softer, trying to absorb the racetrack.
This is for third place between Alesi and Hill. Back with Schumacher chasing Damon Hill's teammate. DC under pressure and looks good. But now he's in traffic. If Michael Schumacher can lock up this championship, he will become the youngest two-time world champion in Formula One history, edging out Emerson Fittipaldi, who was 27 years old when he won his second title back in 1974. Michael Schumacher is just 26. We'll step away for a moment and be back with the Grand Prix of the Pacific from Japan in just a moment. Here's a look at the 1996 Formula One World Championship schedule as it presently exists. The series will begin March 10th in Melbourne, Australia, then head for a doubleheader in South America. On April 28th, the date has been reserved, as have two dates later in the year. We suspect that race, should it happen, will be on the European continent, followed by the San Marino race, Monaco, Spain, Canada, and France, the traditional run of European events. As Derek mentioned, there are 17 dates blocked out, only 14 races confirmed thus far. We are told there will be 2 more dates confirmed, and the season will end a month earlier in deference to the teams who have asked for at least an 18-week minimum break in the off-season. And even with that 18-week break, you can imagine testing will begin as soon as Australia is complete. In fact, the Formula One teams must nominate their drivers for the 1996 season within a week after the Australian season finale in November. And now Michael Schumacher heads for the pits.
So now the pressure is relieved on David Coulthard. So even with a heavier fuel load, Coulthard still seems to have the measure of everybody. He is well in control. And you see the grounding strips there drilled into the pavement. The Benetton runs over them to ground it while they do the refueling.
Trouble getting the refueling valve off, but another quick stop for Schumacher. Now he will have to hope that David Coulthard has problems when he makes his next stop, which should not be for a while yet.
So that leaves David Coulthard almost half a lap ahead as Barrichello slides down the inside of Magnussen. That is a private battle, 10th and 11th. That battle waged earlier on. It is a good one. Two of the youngsters. Magnussen, so cool, made an interesting comment that we giggled about earlier. Magnussen said he would love to have the traction control that he enjoys on his Mercedes DTM car in the German DTM series. Of course, it's terrible to have to step down to the technology of Formula One when you've been used to the high tech of the DTM German series. Mercedes, of course, have been so dominant in that DTM series. And of course, Magnussen is still having a bit of trouble braking because he broke his right leg in a scooter accident in the paddock earlier this season, so he also overcoming some physical difficulties.
He was hit by a car in that accident. His manager was riding on the back of the motorbike, and she was in fairly desperate medical circumstances for some time, but I believe she is recovering. Now here comes Damon Hill for his second stop, and a nose job added on.
I wonder will they change the nose? I don't think. I think it'll take too long because he didn't seem to be any slower when he was behind Jean Alesi, so it may be too much of a risk to pull that nose off. Let's have a look.
Crew cam on the head of the jackman at the front.
Oh, I see what they did. They elected to just clean it up, take the stray bits off, and leave that nose cone on. Too long to change the nose. Herbert's in.
And out, Johnny Herbert. Lots of folks wondering what will happen to him next year. Reportedly speaking with the Tyrrell team. And it is suggested he will come to do some IndyCar testing during the offseason.
And the IndyCar team he is talking to is Chip Ganassi. Chip Ganassi is a much sought-after drive, although Brian Herta, in fact, is contracted there. Chip was keen to test some other drivers. But a lot of people showing interest in Chip Ganassi's team because with that Honda power plant, they do seem to have all the ingredients to be one of the winning teams of next season. Lacey puts his hand up to tell anybody that might be close behind him that I am on my way to the pit lane. Now, where is Damon Hill? Can he make the pass while Lacey is in the pit lane? He couldn't do it the last time. Can he do it this time? What a frustration it's been trying to follow him. Hear the revs. Hear the way he kept his foot on the throttle. That constant revs. Keep the engine up. Oh, good stop. Good stop. I don't think Damon Hill will be able to pass this. Where is Hill? Where's that long camera shot that we wanted of Damon Hill? The director obviously doesn't know who the race is between. He goes back to our man Shuey. Or Shumi.
Or Spoonface, as he is known up and down the pit lane.
The Europeans call him Shuey and the Germans call him Shumi.
Schumacher's younger brother Ralph was recently beaten out for the German Formula 3 championship by 20-year-old Argentine driver Norberto Fontana, who is becoming one of the hot names in the driver stakes for next year. He is talking to the Sauber team, for whom he will do some testing. Looks like one of the footwork cars being parked along the concrete wall. Can't see who the driver is just yet.
Did he just parallel park or did he force the issue? There's some skid marks on the racetrack. I don't think it came from a racing car, but we can't see who it is. This is the Hart V8 engined car that has been reliable, if not necessarily strong, but it is of course one of the local heroes, Taki Inoue.
Brian Hart's engine building operation, excuse me, Derek, is extraordinary. He was interviewed this weekend at the Friday Five, in which 3 drivers and 2 team principals are brought in to be picked apart by the press. Brian Hart mentioned there are 5 engineers on his company staff, 30 employees in all, and yet they build engines that compete with the resources of the Ferraris and Renaults of the world. In fact, they are simultaneously conducting development programs for both V8 and V10 engines. An extraordinarily high-quality effort from such a small operation. Michael Schumacher doing his best to cap his world championship with a victory. He runs in second, and we'll be back. We are back at Aida, Japan. Gerhard Berger completes a very quick pit stop, just 7.9 seconds. Jean Todt, the team manager, looking on. Meanwhile, out on the racetrack, Damon Hill right there has gotten around Jean Alesi, so the order is now Coulthard, Schumacher, Hill, Alesi, and then Gerhard Berger, who pitted from 5th. I'm not quite sure that he is still in 5th position. As mentioned, Gerhard Berger and his wife Anna celebrating the birth of a new baby daughter. Berger, by the way, had one of the most prized bits of racing memorabilia added to a collection being auctioned off to benefit the victims of the Kobe earthquake. That earthquake, in fact, postponed this race because of damage to the infrastructure a few miles away on the coast. But an auction that has toured Japan this month has raised more than $250,000 for the victims of that quake. And one of the most prized possessions was one of Gerhard Berger's helmets. The bids, which closed yesterday, in case you're interested, topped $17,000 for one of Gerhard Berger's racing helmets.
Damon Hill now runs in the top 3. What a frustration it has been. Almost half of the race, 42 laps. He has tried to get by Jean Alesi and finally managed it on his out lap from that pit stop. Now, can he catch Michael Schumacher, or can David Coulthard maintain station over Michael Schumacher? You see, Hill to Schumacher, 39.6 seconds. That is Barrichello in the top of the picture there, still running in the top 10. He is 9th, Panis is 10th, and Barrichello right behind Frentzen, who's 8th, and Eddie Irvine, his teammate, in 7th. And then, of course, the top 6.
19 of our 24 starters remain in the race. The top 8 cars on the lead lap. Comparing first and second pit stops, David Coulthard has not made his second stop yet. As you see, Michael Schumacher and the Benetton team continue to set the pace. Gerhard Berger, good second stop for the Ferrari team in the case of Gerhard Berger.
And just about everybody, Bob, quicker on that second stop, except, interestingly enough, Michael Schumacher. Word is that, our rumor has it that David Brown, who has been engineer to the stars, Mansell, Prost, Senna at Williams, rumor has it that he may move to McLaren with David Coulthard. What a coup that would be for David Coulthard and for McLaren, as the P1 sign goes up. So David Brown, the engineer, so successful at Williams, may be moving to McLaren. Whoa, see that? Car begin to fight for control ahead of Jean Alesi, ahead of Gerhard Berger. Was that his teammate? Yes, indeed, it was his teammate. Alesi, as he fought for control, Berger took advantage of it and went down that inside. Alesi, who has been quicker than Berger for the whole race, now has to give up that 4th place. Of course, Alesi and Berger, here it is in slow-mo replay. Whoa, did you see that? He makes it difficult. Alesi turns down. Berger had no place else to go. He was coming down like a ton of bricks anyway, and Alesi had to let him go. But Berger and Alesi no longer do any testing on the Ferrari V10 because they do not want any possible secretive V10 information moving from Ferrari to Benetton next year. So Larini, who had expected to become Schumacher's teammate next year, continues to be their teammate, or their test driver, and he continues to do all the legwork on that V10 engine that so far seems to be potentially very successful.
Eddie Irvine paid a visit to the Ferrari factory last week. He would like to start testing. Difficult for a driver to do, though. Most of the teams do not release their drivers until the end of the year. Although I suspect we may see some of that change this year, particularly since so many drivers are making switches to teams who want to get their new drivers in the saddle. Thinking, for example, of Benetton. If they want to get Alesi and Berger to begin their testing program, they're going to have to release Michael Schumacher, and the same for Eddie Jordan with Eddie Irvine. For his part, Osamu Goto, who took care of Honda's 10-cylinder program years ago that carried Ayrton Senna to the World Championship and now works on Ferrari's 10-cylinder engine program, says the new engine is getting all of our resources. Ferrari putting a tremendous effort behind the new V10. We'll be back for more of the Grand Prix of the Pacific in just a moment. Welcome back to the AIDA circuit. The TI circuit in AIDA, I should say, and the Grand Prix of the Pacific. Bob Varsha, Derek Daly with you. Running Formula One cars around this tricky little circuit, says Jan Magnussen, says Mika Salo, like flying a remote-controlled helicopter in your living room. It is that tight.
See the dust and the sand? Offline, that was one of the problems. Damon Hill said coming off the last corner was like a beach. Oh, heavy smoke from somebody. Is that one of the Saubers? That's a Sauber right ahead of David Coulthard. Frentzen. Look at this traffic jam here.
It is Mika Salo. Got out into the way of the faster cars, then thought better of it, jumped back behind the Jordan and paid for it. There's the gap from leader Coulthard to the second place car of Michael Schumacher. And for that reason, Coulthard's going to want to make quick work of this traffic.
The gap is coming down, but Schumacher needs to close in on David Coulthard because they each have to do one more pit stop. So the fight is between now and the next pit stop. We have to remember that the battle right ahead of them between Frentzen and Eddie Irvine is a battle for position. That is 7th and 8th place, so they do not want to move over and lose too much momentum. As the boys in blue at Williams prepare for another pit stop. 48 laps now gone, and David Coulthard's second stop looks imminent.
Before he comes in, we want to remind you our next stop will be the Grand Prix of Japan from Suzuka, coming your way next Sunday at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time, 4:30 a.m. Pacific. The magnificent Suzuka circuit really gives these cars a chance to stretch their legs. We hope you'll be with us for the Grand Prix of Japan next Sunday. A remarkable season-ending charge for David Coulthard of Scotland. Oop, lighten up one of the tires there. Perhaps the road-holding ability of the Goodyears beginning to go away, and he is in. Coulthard is in. Michael Schumacher will almost certainly take over the race lead, but Schumacher still has another pit stop to come.
We think he has another pit stop to come.
Good point.
David Coulthard hopes he has another pit stop to come. You can hear him on that rev limiter, 75 miles an hour.
Sounds like someone going by with a broken exhaust header on the racetrack.
Pedro Diniz was fined $10,000 this morning for passing the checkered flag twice. There were other pit stop speed violation fines this weekend. Magnussen and Suzuki were both fined. Magnussen, I suppose you can understand, he got $7,500, and of course Suzuki hasn't been around for a while. He was also fined $5,000.
Well, Magnussen was traveling 18 miles an hour above the speed limit. Suzuki about 6 miles an hour. Very expensive clicks indeed.
Now Schumacher has the same traffic problem, well, similar traffic problem that David Coulthard had.
He is now the race leader, coming up to try to put a lap on Rubens Barrichello, who runs in 9th place. We checked in with the Jordan team to see how much equipment they are carrying for these last 3 races far away from their home base. 24 tons. This is for one team, the Jordan Peugeot outfit. And that includes 3,100 separate items of equipment that have to be cataloged and invoiced for customs purposes. An extraordinary logistical effort to spend this much time on the road.
And of course the problem is, it is 3 races in a row, and they actually fly out their sub-assembly men to help put these cars back together. After this race, they have 2 days to turn the race cars around before they go to Suzuka, and there is no time to work. They don't want to work these people all night, so they literally have to fly people all around the world just to help sub-assemble these cars. It is a big, huge traveling circus.
I can remember it wasn't but a couple of seasons ago that McLaren, perhaps the the most complex and far-reaching team in the pit lane, was traveling with about 10 tons of equipment. Jordan has more than twice that much. Extraordinary how things grow. We'll be back with more from the Pacific in just a moment. Leaving the pit lane at top speed, Eddie Irvine, a very close moment. I think that was Mika Salo who almost stuffed the Tyrrell right into the Jordan as the two exited. Meanwhile, out on the racetrack, Michael Schumacher leads with clear track in front of him.
We mentioned earlier that Michael Schumacher tested last week at Imola. In fact, the crash that he had was at the top of the hill at the chicane, and as soon as he hit the wall backwards, he then complained very strongly to the organisers and to the FIA that he believes that corner needs to be changed before the Grand Prix goes back there next year. He thinks there should be more tyre barriers and more protection if the car does in fact lose control there. I suppose when you're a world champion and you make a mistake, you can blame everything else around you and you'll still get things done. They're 22 seconds.
Well into the second half of the race now. Let's check out our Haviland race recap. The leader is Michael Schumacher, has led for a handful of laps now since taking over when David Coulthard pitted. One lead change between the two drivers on the racetrack as Heinz-Harald Frentzen exits in the Sauber. Out of the race, Bertrand Gachot, who would probably be the first to tell you he was never really in it this weekend. Jules Bouillon, tough break for him after being second quickest in the morning warm-up. Aguri Suzuki out of one of his home Grand Prix. And Andrea Montermini completing a disastrous weekend for the Pacific team. Taki Inoue also out of the race, a big disappointment to this Japanese crowd. Fairly light attrition, however. Just those 5 cars out of the running at this point. 19 still in it. And of that, 6, the top 6 cars, all points earners on the lead lap.
Now, David Coulthard, you saw there 21 seconds. That's beginning to get close enough for Schumacher to be able to make another pit stop. And if he doesn't have to take on too much fuel, he possibly could keep the lead. So this race is now in the hands again of David Coulthard because he has to make up some gains on Michael Schumacher here because this is too close for comfort. We presume Schumacher will have to make another stop. So Coulthard cannot afford to get caught up in traffic. Watch the time here as Schumacher, it's 20 seconds. So David Coulthard is beginning to eat into that lead that Michael Schumacher has. If it gets into the 17 or 18 second lead, then it is doubtful if Schumacher can make a stop, get enough fuel, and keep that lead because the in time and the slow speed down through that pit lane is the problem. Somebody off the racetrack? Some part of the car was off the racetrack because that sand beginning to blow its way out onto the racing line. Another one of the problems here, the cars, they get so close to the edge of the racetrack, they actually suck the stones and dirt back onto the racing line, and that cost David Coulthard during practice because the stone cut one of his front tires, and I'm sorry, that was it. That was one of his tires that he wanted to use for the race, and that became a non-starter.
Coming up later on after our broadcast this morning, we'll get you set for the day in the NFL at 11:45 a.m. Eastern, 8:45 a.m. Pacific. The best NFL pregame show on television. Berman, Jackson, Theismann, and Sharp. Joe Theismann will take a look at how the quarterbacks can protect themselves given all the injuries we've seen to the likes of Dan Marino and Boomer Esiason. We'll take a look at what has happened to Drew Bledsoe as his season has come just about off the rails, and lots more, including a lineup for all of today's NFL action coming up on NFL Game Day later this morning here on ESPN. On to the front straightaway, Damon Hill.
The man who enjoys an enormous amount of support here, and in fact everywhere he races in Japan. I suppose people are mindful of his superb performance in Suzuka last year when he was able to beat Michael Schumacher fair and square. But so many Japanese people here with British Union Jack flags and all sorts of flags and hoardings made supporting Damon Hill here in Japan.
Ferrari team prepares for Jean Alesi, we believe. A puff of blue smoke out the back of Damon Hill. There is Jean Alesi. We expect him in the pits momentarily. We'll take a quick timeout and return for that pit stop. Stand by for more of the Grand Prix of the Pacific here on ESPN. Back in Japan for the Grand Prix of the Pacific, Jean Alesi brings the number 27 Ferrari into the pits. There the crew waits.
77th time he has started a Grand Prix for Ferrari. You mentioned earlier his 100th Grand Prix has been robbed of a few along the way. Good stop here, 9.4. Pit lane exit has been widened since last season. Lots of changes, lots of cosmetic changes, mainly to the gravel traps. They are now deeper than they've ever been before. Longer, wider, stretch further back to the tire walls. Tire walls you see on the top of the picture there. They were 2 deep last year. They're 3 deep this year. Box. Box, of course, means pit. P4 for Gerhard Berger. He won't be in P4 for very long. Johnny Herbert, currently in 5th place, can take over that P4 from Berger. This will be his last stop. 57 laps now completed. Schumacher would believe one more pit stop as Berger makes his way to the box. That chicane on the way in has also been opened up. That was much tighter last year.
Ferrari crew goes to work on Gerhard Berger, the most experienced Ferrari driver of all time. No man has started as many Grands Prix for Ferrari as has Gerhard Berger. Jean Todt looks on. Rumors of rumblings within the Fiat empire, some restructuring perhaps to dilute the influence of the Agnelli family. And there are rumors that heads might roll within the Ferrari team. Meanwhile, through the Moss S's, which are less S-like than they used to be, given some straightening out that has happened, Michael Schumacher, and there his team awaits him, about half a lap away. If Schumacher can clinch this World Championship with 2 races remaining, you can go back to 1992 when Nigel Mansell absolutely dominated, but despite the way certain teams have dominated Formula One in recent years, the championship has more often than not gone down to the last race of the year, if not that, the last 2 races of the year. Because before Nigel Mansell in 1992, Mansell clinched after 11 of 16 races. You have to go all the way back to 1971 when Jackie Stewart won the second of his 3 titles to find a race in which there were more than 2 races remaining in the season when the championship clinched. It does not happen often in Formula One. And considering that this man, Michael Schumacher, was taken out of 2 races by Damon Hill at Britain and at Monza in Italy, he could have clinched much earlier.
Now watch things very closely here because he was 21 seconds ahead of David Coulthard. He puts on brand new tires. This is a good stop. Here's Coulthard, top of the picture. Oh, Schumacher pulls it off. He is on brand new tires. He may have just made the move of the race by staying out long enough that he takes a light fuel load on. And David Coulthard is stuck behind traffic. Now has a real fight on his hands, having dominated most of this race as Damon Hill makes his way down the pit lane. What a move again by Benetton. They managed to pull it off when Schumacher didn't seem to have the speed or the advantage while he was out on the racetrack.
Be interesting to watch the in and out laps for Michael Schumacher. He is a master at making time while his rivals are in the pits. There you see Coulthard has gotten around the Sauber of Heinz-Harald Frentzen. That Sauber will be powered by a new Ford Cosworth V10 engine next year. That engine was unveiled recently. It is lighter, smaller, more powerful, more dynamic than the V8 engine they use at the moment. It is responsible in large part for keeping Heinz-Harald Frentzen within the Sauber Ford organization.
Frentzen, of course, has a 5-year option with Ford to go wherever that engine goes. What a luxury and comfort that is for a driver. But now let's see, how deep can David Coulthard dig? Can he produce some magic here? Can he wind up this Williams FW17B, the B version that has more downforce, more grip and more stability? Can he reel in Briatore's man? Michael Schumacher is very hard to pass, but can David Coulthard make this a real fight?
Meanwhile, Mark Blundell pits the McLaren Mercedes with that unusual midship wing. The Benetton team awaits Johnny Herbert. We'll be back with more in just a moment. Welcome back to the Grand Prix of the Pacific. 15th of 17 races in the 1995 Formula One World Driving Championship. Bob Varsha, Derek Daly with you. Michael Schumacher has pulled it off again. When it didn't appear he had the race car under him to win the race, somehow he and the Benetton team got him out with a load of fuel and fresh tires when it mattered most. Recall back in Portugal, where Schumacher came out on fresh tires, battled Damon Hill, who was on worn tires, having pitted much earlier. Schumacher was able to pull off the daring pass in a tight corner and go on to win the race. Right now, it would appear that he has done it again. He said he would be happy to coast around, take no risks, and clinch his world championship in conservative style, but it just seems to be completely out of character. Flavio Briatore looks on. The man with the hat and the glasses is Ross Brawn, who is much of the engineering force behind this team. And they have put on another great show this year.
21 seconds of a lead. Damon Hill locks up that front, but 21 seconds of a lead by Schumacher was too close for comfort for Damon Hill. We thought 17 to 18 seconds was what the gap needed to be for Coulthard to take the lead over again, and that looks like what it was. It looks like he came up about 3 seconds short, and that has given him a mighty Japanese mountain to climb here at Aida.
Don't forget, coming up tonight on ESPN2, RPM Tonight with Kenny Mayne and my colleague Derek Daly, who will have a report on this race. We'll also see all the action from the Winston Cup and Busch Grand National races at Rockingham. Hear from IndyCar President Andrew Craig. Watch the first IndyCar test at Homestead Motorsports Park, and much more. Tonight on ESPN2 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time.
That was a quick look at Jan Magnussen, who was running in 10th place, 2 places ahead of his team leader for this weekend, Mark Blundell. Mark Blundell, another driver who is on the unemployed list as of the end of the season. 2 more races. Wants to stay in Formula One. Having an interested look, though, also at IndyCar racing to see what the opportunities over there may be. Now you can see Schumacher beginning to stretch his lead now over David Coulthard. Those brand new tires giving him that extra grip he needs through these medium speed corners at Aida. And David Coulthard, of course, a lot more laps on his tires. It's hard to believe. Look at the braking grip that Schumacher has over the Ferrari.
I was watching that at the previous corner. He just closed right up. In fact, almost hit the Ferrari from behind. Extraordinary. Johnny Herbert says Schumacher does it by holding his speed on the throttle into the corners. It's amazing, the speed differential measured against a car as potent as the Ferrari.
And that ability to hold the car on the limit or over the limit on the power, Schumacher has the confidence to do that, and Johnny Herbert continues to say he doesn't have the confidence to do that and drive his Benetton like Schumacher drives his. And Herbert, quite frankly, says it takes him way too long to get accustomed to the Benetton each weekend, and therefore he struggles in qualifying to get far enough up the grid, which gives you, of course, bad track position. You're in traffic, you lose time, and then it's an ongoing knock-on effect and moves you down the grid.
Tom Walkinshaw said it years ago. Schumacher belongs with the likes of Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna, drivers who can win you a race that you have no business winning. For much of the year, he has not had the car under him that the Williams drivers have. We talked about how dominant David Coulthard was at the beginning of this race. But when the tires go off, the fuel load gets light, and the driver needs to make up for perhaps what the car cannot offer him, no one seems to be in the same league with Michael Schumacher.
In fairness to David Coulthard, this is Schumacher's 4th year. This is David Coulthard's 1st season in Formula One.
Good point. Schumacher is out front. Coulthard trails, learning all the way. Damon Hill runs 3rd. We'll be back with more from AIDA after this. We are back at the Grand Prix of the Pacific at the TI Circuit. TI for Tanaka International in AIDA, Japan. Or somewhere near AIDA, Japan. There is not much around this racetrack in the rocky southern part of the Japanese mainland. Coming up immediately following our coverage of this race, Sports Weekly, with highlights of the World Series and another great pitching performance by Greg Maddux. College football recap, NHL scores and highlights, and much more on Sports Weekly coming up next. Been a big weekend in sports. Congratulations to the Atlanta Braves taking a 1-0 lead over Cleveland in what was a great baseball game. If you didn't see it, check out the highlights coming up next. Michael Schumacher en route to his 2nd straight Formula One World Championship. The youngest 2-time world champion ever. And as mentioned at the top of our show, he joins the likes of Alberto Ascari, the maestro Juan Manuel Fangio, Black Jack Brabham, Sir Jack Brabham, I guess we should call him, Alain Prost, and the late Ayrton Senna.
And if Michael Schumacher wins today, which he looks as if he's on his way, that will give him 8 wins for this season, which is only 1 behind the record of 9 wins held currently by the former world champion Nigel Mansell. And that, of course, was 1992.
He will also surpass Damon Hill's late father, Graham Hill, in points scored in Grand Prix competition. All in all, an astonishing career for Michael Schumacher since he made his debut driving the Jordan at Spa in Belgium, where he qualified 7th. Absolutely astonished everyone. The car let him down at the start of the race when the clutch broke. Whoop, speaking of breakage, one of the Jordans pulls over by the side of the road. I believe that's Rubens Barrichello. You can just see the top of his helmet. Yes, it is. The man who stood on a Grand Prix podium in 3rd place in this race last year sees his race come to an end.
He was running in 9th, wasn't having a great day, but again, one of the Jordans pulls off. I wonder, is it continually being plagued again by the vibration which breaks the clutches on these cars? There is an unusual vibration at the flywheel of these Peugeot engines. You can see that it's just going into the Moss S's. You can see where they widened the Moss S's, the new tarmac that's laid down there. What's the flame out of the bottom of the car here as it begins to, well, you don't see it, but it begins to light some of the dry grass. But I mentioned this vibration before in the Peugeot engine. Because of the vibration, they cannot use the normal triple carbon clutch. They have to use the older double carbon clutch, which just simply is not man enough for the job. It's too much on the edge, and they have broken so many times this year. They have a fix for it for next year, but that doesn't help the points gathering for this season.
The running order is Schumacher, Coulthard, Hill, Berger, Alesi, and Johnny Herbert, the top 6 cars, the points earners. And Heinz-Harald Frentzen runs in 7th, Eddie Irvine 8th, Olivier Panis 9th, Mark Blundell is 10th, Jan Magnussen 11th. A good performance for the McLaren team in his Formula One debut. Mika Salo runs 12th, Pedro Lamy 13th, Ukio Katayama 14th, Luca Badoer 15th, and Roberto Moreno 16th. Pedro Diniz is 17th. He and teammate Roberto Moreno now 5 laps down to the race leader.
So we saw the power move of the race, keeping those brand new tires fresh and ready for the sprint home. And that has proven to be the difference here between Schumacher and David Coulthard. Schumacher hasn't had it all his own way this weekend. He was fastest in the first session. Then he spun in qualifying on Saturday. Struggled in the early laps of this race and then has come good. While Damon Hill, as this season rolls on, just seems to continue to get mired in a struggle.
There is Damon Hill in third place. We'll step away for a moment and be back for more of the Grand Prix of the Pacific as Frank Williams looks on. Welcome back to the land of the rising sun, and the sun rising highest with 10 laps to go in the Grand Prix of the Pacific is Michael Schumacher, about to clinch back-to-back world championships, joining the elite company of Ascari, Fangio, Brabham, Prost, and Senna.
Two of the drivers here, Bob, who flew their own private jets to get here to Japan. Gerhard Berger had to make 2 fuel stops on the way, so I don't know what jet he has, but doesn't have fuel tanks big enough to get here, I know that.
There aren't many of those. Schumacher also joins the likes of Niki Lauda and Jackie Stewart, and drivers who have won more than one world title. The way he's been racing of late, we are truly in the era of Michael Schumacher. It's going to be very interesting to see what he can do with the Ferrari in 1996.
And remember what Mr. Agnelli said about next season: if we do not win the World Championship, it is our fault because we have everything. Schumacher may be in a position with John Barnard's car and that new V10 engine, if it shows as strong as it has so far. Could he win 3 back-to-back world championships? He certainly has shown that he is capable of winning races no matter where he starts on the grid, no matter what the weather, no matter what the opposition. He just seems to be able to find a way to win. And that is the mark of a true, and in this case, an unusual champion.
There's Flavio Briatore biting his lip. He always looks nervous right down to the end of the race, as opposed to his arch rival, Frank Williams, who is completely impassive, no matter how great the joy or how deep the sorrow. Right now, Schumacher runs first, Johnny Herbert sixth. That would mean 11 points toward the Constructors' Championship for Benetton, with David Coulthard second and Damon Hill third. 6 points for Coulthard, 4 for Hill. 10 points for the Williams team if they were to finish as they are, which means that Benetton would pick up 1 point for a total of 21 points, separating them from the defending Constructors' champions, the Williams team. And as Derek has mentioned so many times before, as a former driver for Frank Williams, it would be nice if you won the Drivers' Championship, but the one I want is the Constructors.
When you go into the office of Frank Williams, it is the pictures of the Constructors' Championship. Eddie Irvine's in trouble. That right rear suspension is broken, or he might have a puncture. He does have a puncture in that right rear. Slowly makes his way around. He was running in the top 10. He was 8th. He will lose those positions now. Olivier Panis and Mark Blundell were 9th and 10th. They will take advantage of this. So yet again, more problems for the Jordan. Only thing you can do is slowly make your way back and try and keep that car in one piece. Look at the mounting Gary Anderson has used for that midship rear wing to bolt on some more downforce. Trying to send the load down through the rear suspension, in through those rear wing stays, as opposed down through the engine cover that McLaren uses.
Team waiting for him. Word from the pits is that they still do not know why Rubens Barrichello stopped on the racetrack.
Superb design of racing car, this Jordan. When you get close to it, every part fits so well. All the carbon is rounded in the right areas. just a superbly thought out and built and constructed racing car that is almost on the pace, not quite there yet. Gary Anderson said they definitely need a full-fledged testing team next year as part of the move to take them to the next level.
We talked earlier about all the equipment Jordan Peugeot is carrying around with them. In looking at the team manifest, 4 engine computers used by the Peugeot engineers weigh more than 700 pounds apiece. So you're looking at more than a ton just in computers, just to monitor engine functions. There's David Coulthard, who at this point is probably wondering what might have been. He runs second to the Meister Schumacher. We'll be right back. Back in Aida, Japan, where the Grand Prix of the Pacific is into its final half-dozen laps, and David Coulthard is closing up on race leader Michael Schumacher, but there is slower traffic ahead.
And no sooner do you say he's closing up than Schumacher manages to pull out a second, because it was in the 6s on the last lap, but David Coulthard came up behind the 2 McLarens of Blundell and Magnussen, who are running in 9th and 10th. And to put a lap on them, it wasn't as easy to slice by them as it needed to be. So Schumacher again pulls out another safety second.
The running order is Schumacher, Coulthard, and Hill, then Berger, Alesi, and Herbert. Frank Williams looks on. There's the Benetton Brain Trust. Shadows beginning to grow long here in the mountains in the Okayama prefecture of southern Japan. About 500 miles south of Tokyo. The teams will travel a couple of 100 miles north to Suzuka. As mentioned earlier, it was the Kobe earthquake earlier this year, such a tremendous disaster just a short distance from this racetrack, that postponed this race from an April date to October. In fact, last week the teams were given a bit of a shock when another earthquake took place, measuring 4.8 on the Richter scale, centered in Osaka Bay off the coast near Kobe. But fortunately, not enough damage done and no reported loss of life that we are aware of, but kind of thing that must send shivers up the spine of people living in this part of the world after the disaster in January at Kobe.
You can see now that Michael Schumacher, well in control again, sent a clear message down the pit lane to David Coulthard's pit when he pulled out those 3 seconds in under 3 laps that says to David Coulthard, don't bother even trying to catch me because I have so much in hand if I need it. 4 laps remaining. And Coulthard at this stage would need to be 2 seconds a lap faster than Schumacher. And that ain't going to happen, boys.
There is Coulthard. Oh, excuse me, Damon Hill. Hill running in third. The only 3 cars on the lead lap now: Schumacher, Coulthard, and Hill. Ferrari flags in the grandstand. Always Ferrari flags. One of the Ligers, Olivier Panis, running behind Michael Schumacher right now. Jos Verstappen, who was once Michael Schumacher's teammate at Benetton, released from his contract a few weeks ago, is scheduled to test that Ligier. In fact, he was scheduled to have tested it before this race, but there were no Mugen Honda V10 engines available for that test. Now we understand that Verstappen will also shop his talents to the Arrows team, driving the footwork. It has substantial backing from the Dutch Philips Electronics company. And so we may see Jos Verstappen, once the hot name in Formula One, back in the cockpit in 1996.
Incidentally, the Arrows team were the very first Formula One team to take Jos Verstappen to a Formula One test, and he was blindingly fast then. They still like him, the fact that even though he rode off their car during that test. But he has displayed the speed. And boy, he was thrown into the deep end when he was at Benetton. But he said it, he is still a hot property.
Sun beginning to get low. Glare may be causing a problem for the drivers.
This is down through Redmond. This is down through the David Hobbs corner. Right-hander Mike Knight onto the last corner. 80 miles an hour through here in third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear, up to sixth gear. 175 miles an hour down this front straight. It's not the fastest straight on the racetrack. Last through here. This is the Williams left-hander, and you'll see where they widened the S bend here called Moss, named after the great Sterling Moss, of course. And then down to Atwood, named after Dickie Atwood.
Great British sports car racing driver. That Mike Knight corner is named for one of the founders of the Elf Winfield Driving School, home of the famous Pilote Elf competition at the Ricard circuit in southern France. Ricard making a bid for the French Grand Prix. Manicourt's contract is now up. A new contract being let by the French racing authorities. Ricard, Manicourt, and the Le Mans Bugatti circuit all bidding for the French Grand Prix next summer and in the 4 or 5 summers to follow that. Le Mans considered a long shot, while Paul Ricard has stepped up and promised to spend millions of French francs freshening up their facilities, a track that is a big favorite among Formula One teams and drivers for the ambiance of the French Gold Coast. Final lap for Michael Schumacher, and the troops march to the pit wall to salute their man for the 8th time in 1995. He could have driven around in 4th place and still captured his 2nd straight world championship, but that is not Michael Schumacher's style. He fought his way to the front, coming wheel to wheel with arch rival Damon Hill on a couple of occasions, challenging the Ferraris, overhauling David Coulthard, who has been absolutely mesmerizing around the track this weekend. And in the end, Michael Schumacher comes through again, the Weltmeister, world champion for 1995. The phenomenal Schumacher.
$24 million man, maybe he is worth it. He leads this team. I wonder how many members of this team will be left after this season. The drivers are gone. Ross Brawn, the designer, might be gone. A lot of people might be gone. But this is their day again.
Ironic that it comes in one of the most remote racetracks in the world, but that will not bother the Benetton team as the checkered flag waves. And no doubt the champagne is on ice in the Benetton garage. 2 pieces of business in 1995. Win the Drivers' World Championship, which they did last year. Win the Constructors' World Championship, which they did not. And they are halfway to those 2 goals. There is David Coulthard. Give the young Scotsman credit. He set the bar higher than anyone in qualifying. But when it comes down to racing, it is difficult to beat the Benetton Renault juggernaut when skippered by Michael Schumacher. And here comes Damon Hill in 3rd place. And slowing immediately, waving to the crowd. The disappointment certainly bitter for Damon Hill. He will climb the podium and watch as his arch rival Michael Schumacher is declared world champion. We'll be right back. This ESPN Speed World presentation, the Formula One Grand Prix of the Pacific, has been brought to you by Volvo. Volvo reminds you to drive safely. On top of the podium, Michael Schumacher. About to accept his trophy. On the left, David Coulthard. On the right, Damon Hill, the 2nd and 3rd place finishers. Winning the race is great, But with it comes the 1995 World Championship. Here are the points. It is over for the title. Michael Schumacher with an unassailable total of 92 points. It will be left to Damon Hill, David Coulthard, and Jean Alesi, along with Johnny Herbert, to fight over second place in the 2 remaining races in the 1995 season. In the Constructors' Championship, Benetton Renault picks up 1 more point. They now lead Williams Renault by 21 points, and that battle will go right down to the streets of Adelaide, Australia, and our season finale. Checkered flag coverage of this Grand Prix of the Pacific will be coming your way on Tuesday, November 7th at 1:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We hope you'll join us for that. Our next stop on the Formula One World Championship Tour will travel just a couple of hundred miles north to Suzuka, Japan, for the Grand Prix of Japan next Sunday morning at 7:30 a.m. Derek Daly, your final thoughts.
Well, despite the fact that Michael Schumacher was not even able to qualify on the front row of the grid, he still seems to be able to find a way to win in the races. And if you said at the start of this race, may the best man win, how could you argue with the result we've seen?
No question about it. Now sharing the champagne with his team manager, Flavio Briatore, and the 2 Williams drivers join them on top of the podium. The new Weltmeister, 2-time world champion Michael Schumacher. Here's a look at the final results. 8th victory of the year for Michael Schumacher, putting him beyond reach of David Coulthard in 2nd and Damon Hill in 3rd. The Ferraris of Gerhard Berger and Jean Alesi finished 4th and 5th, and Johnny Herbert picked up that all-important point for Benetton in 6th. As you take a look down through the rest of the field, of our 24 starters, 17 made it to the finish line, losing only 7 along the way. All in all, pretty light attrition. The margin of victory, 14.9 seconds. No question about it. This is the era of Michael Schumacher, and he at this point seems virtually unbeatable. 2 interesting races still to come in the 1995 schedule, the Grand Prix of Japan from Suzuka, and then the season finale and the final Grand Prix to be held on the streets of Adelaide, Australia, before that Grand Prix moves on to Melbourne. Join us next week for the Grand Prix of Japan. Until then, I'm Bob Barsha for Derek Daly. So long, everyone.